All right, all right. It is 10 a.m. and good morning, everyone, and welcome to our July MADE session. We are so happy to have you here joining us as we continue on our mission to educate CAMs, board members, and all others who are wanting to learn more about community association living. In today's session, we're going to discuss emergency responder radio communication and the Florida Fire Code. Now, we could not bring these sessions to you without our generous sponsors, Stromer and Company, as well as Godey, DuBost and Cross, who not only developed and paid for this program, but also put in lots of hours behind the scenes, planning, preparing, and coordinating and organizing for each session. If you're not familiar with who our sponsors are, let me help you a little bit out and give you some insight. Stromer and Company is a full-service CPA firm specializing in audit, review, tax, bookkeeping, and consulting work. My name is Rain McReevy, and I'm one of the directors at the firm. From Godey, DuBost and Cross, we have Richard, who can tell you a little bit more about the services that they offer. Richard?
Thank you. Godey, DuBost and Cross, we're a full service law firm, but have a primary practice area in community association law, which keeps us very, very busy.
Wonderful. And it is my absolute pleasure to welcome today Pure Wireless to our group today. We have Dane Bowling as well as Wayne Martin. Gentlemen, would you please just take a moment and introduce yourselves?
Go ahead, Wayne.
You're on mute, Wayne. You got to unmute yourself.
Good morning, and thanks for allowing us to be here today. My name is Wayne Martin, and I've got over 40 years in the fire service and emergency management. I've spent 15 years as a fire chief, 15 years the chief officer, which included fire marshal. So it's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to be the public safety director with Pure Wireless.
My name is Dane Bowling. I'm the CTO and one of the founders of Pure Wireless. Our main focus is improving wireless within high-rise buildings, specifically condominiums down here in Southwest Florida. And it's a pleasure to be on this panel.
Wonderful. And just a few more minor things before we kick off into our presentation. If you have any questions, please type them in the chat or in the question box. If you want a copy of the PowerPoint or have questions directly for Pure Wireless, you can contact them directly, or you could send them over to Richard or myself and we can go ahead and pass them over to them. And another thing, everyone always wants to ask, where can I get a copy of this recording? We are working on it. We are trying to find a safe and effective way that we can distribute it to everyone. We're not quite there yet. As soon as we do, we will make sure that everyone gets notified. All right, without any further ado, gentlemen, turning it over to you.
Okay, well, let me start off first by kind of talking about the law, and then we'll let the Pure Wireless guys kind of get into the nitty gritty. I've got to give a big compliment to Pure Wireless and Elliot Singer and Dan and Wayne, because while this law that we're going to discuss today has really been on the books since 2016, I got to be honest with you. I was not aware of it, and I was not aware of the deadlines that are fast approaching. And I don't think a lot of my colleagues were, because we talk about all kinds of things, condo, HOA related all the time with all the lawyers in the state. And I got to be honest, I never heard anybody talk about this at all. And so when it was brought to me, I'm like, what? And I went and I got to give these guys credit. I went and I looked it up, and it's Florida statute 633.202. It's been on the book since 2016 with certain deadlines and dates. And then I think back in July of 2021, they extended the date timeline just a little bit, and that's what brought it onto my radar. I'm going to paraphrase what it is. These guys are the experts. They'll kind of tell me where I'm wrong, but my understanding is basically what this law says is if you're a building that has 75 feet or greater in height with an occupiable floor that's 75 feet or higher, which is considered a high rise, you have to test your building to make sure that communications from the top of the building, if there are first responders and emergency people in the building, they can communicate with the people in the bottom, at the bottom of the building, because the way buildings are built, there's a lot of interference. So what this law, it's pretty simple. It says you got to test your building, which basically now you need to test the building, And if you do not have, your fire marshal doesn't tell you that you've got sufficient communications, then by January 1, 2024, you have to have pulled a permit to upgrade or enhance the building. And these guys will explain what that means, so that by January 1, 2025, your building is compliant and you can have communications from the top to the bottom by first responders. So the testing needs to be done now. And then if your building doesn't pass, you've got to start to put in place the requirements to bring it up to basically the fire code. I wouldn't wait on this, because with all of the other engineers and things that are coming, with other bills that we've talked about and we'll talk about for other condo related issues, these kind of technical engineers and experts like Pure Wireless are going to be very, very busy with a lot of other things. So I would recommend that if you're a building that falls into this requirement, that you get on board now and figure out, are you going to have to do this? The second thing is, I was reading it again. It does apply to buildings 75 feet or greater with an occupiable floor. But just because you don't meet that requirement, I think potentially there's a duty for boards to determine whether they have the ability, first responders, to communicate. I would want, if I was in a building that's 5 stories high or 6 and doesn't meet the requirement, I think as a board, I would still want to know, in an emergency situation, can there be proper communication? And your board may want to consider looking into that, even if you don't have to comply necessarily. I mean, the law, and we'll get into this a little bit in greater detail, a board has a fiduciary duty to prevent foreseeable harm, okay? If you know there's a dangerous condition, you have an obligation as a fiduciary of the association and to protect the building to take reasonable steps to prevent foreseeable harm. The obvious foreseeable harm here is there is an emergency situation, trying to evacuate the building, and the communications in the building, which we all use today, wireless, doesn't work. So I'm not saying you're absolutely liable, but I think there's a potential risk there that you ought to explore and at least understand. With that, I'm happy to turn it over to Dan and Wayne. I think they can explain kind of the history of this. Where did this all come about? I think that's interesting. And I think they can explain the technical side of these things. We'll answer questions as they come in, and I'll try to throw in legal things as necessary. So guys, take it away.
Well, I think what would be very good is to have maybe Wayne describe how this came about, because it came about back in 2016, was it, Wayne?
Yes, correct.
And he can describe how this came about, and then I can, I'm a little confused whether I'm doing the presentation or you guys are running the presentation. Either way, I'm prepared. So I'll let Wayne talk a little bit about his background and how this came about, because it's statewide. It's not just in our area. It's a statewide law, and each area, which Wayne can attest to, they either enforce or do not enforce, and they have their own ways of being able to adjust things as they see fit for their local areas. So I'll let Wayne talk about that a little bit, and then I can get into the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Dane. This started, well, it's been a long time. Communications always pops up as the issue that takes place, whether it's on a fire scene or a police emergency scene. Communications ends up being a problem. And this started with 9/11 on that day 22 years ago, and where firefighters couldn't speak out of the building with their handy-talkie, their portable radio. And it's the same thing that comes alongside the use of the cell phone, where people can't get out of the building due to the nature of the building and how it's constructed, and the fact that today they're tighter with windows that are hurricane resistant and the steel they put in these buildings. So it's starting with 9/11 at the World Trade Center, and it took some time the reports to come out and what some of the problems were. And it's been going on now for across the nation to improve communications coming out of these buildings nationwide. In 2016, the Florida legislature saw fit to enact the 633, 202 there and 18, and to enact that as putting two-way radio enhancement systems in our high-rise buildings. Actually, as you say, Richard, in any building. It could be a mall, it can be a movie theater, whatever it may be, any place of assembly actually, or any place where it's not, the signal's not coming out. It was lobbied for by the fire service, the Florida fire marshals, the Florida fire chiefs, the Florida firefighters, and again, the legislators saw fit to enact it. The key to this is it talks about the AHJ, or the authority having jurisdiction. And the authority having jurisdiction for the implementation of this is your local fire department. Whether it's a city, a county, or an independent fire district, they're the responsible agency with the authority to implement this. It is vague because it gives them virtually 100% authority of how to implement it. So we may see it different from city to city, from county to county, into how they implement this part of the statute. Some of the things that Richard mentioned were the extensions that have been given through the legislature to give people a little more time. January 1, 2024, having in place a permit, which means you would need that test to be done. You would need the permit in hand, not in hand, but at least applied for us when we speak to most of these fire marshals. But by January 1, 2025, you need to have this installed. So it's a lot of work, and it's going to take time, and it's going to take money. But that's why we've been working to educate the community, educate the community association managers and others to be sure that there's time to get it all done. A couple other things. When we talk about the authority having jurisdiction, the fire service has been given the responsibility through the Florida Fire Prevention Code to implement this. And there's a couple of reasons for that. First and foremost is a fire marshal inspector has authority to go into a building, into those common areas, and to inspect it. So they may be inspecting that for exit lights. They may be inspecting it to make sure an exit is not blocked or locked. And this is something that was added to it, that they can enforce this with the two-way enhanced radio communication system. And the best way to do that is through a test. Now, keeping in mind that this is not just fire. Fire has the authority to go in and do it, but it also is all public safety. So it can be police, and it will also be EMS that will use this system. EMS doesn't do any type of inspections at all. That's just not their role. The fire service has that role. And the police, as I understand it, to go into your building would need a warrant to actually do an inspection, where the fire service has this responsibility. But as we go forward here, we as Pure Wireless look to come alongside each of you to make it easy for you and to make it safe for the firefighter as well as for public safety.
Okay, Dan, I think you're going to have to run your PowerPoint because I don't think we have that capability.
Not a problem.
Okay.
There's our pretty first slide. So we're Pure Wireless. And for some reason, Elliot was having some issues logging in. So you won't see his pretty face on this presentation, but maybe the next time. You've met Wayne and myself. But our main focus is to talk to you about how to make these buildings safer, and how by making them safer, you may end up making them smarter and more valuable as well. So it's not all negative. Oh God, I got to go put in some new fangled system and it's going to cost me a lot of money. So I've got a nice little presentation here that I think you would find interesting. that was a cute little video that I think kind of gets the point across, but I highly recommend anyone on the webinar, check out saferbuildings.org. You can become a member. We are a member. They're a group that they're made up of first responders, retired first responders. They really push the envelope on how to make your building safer and so forth. And they're lobbying. They're for better communications within buildings. And I think that it's a very good resource that you can utilize. And so feel free to check them out. We are a member. But I want to go ahead and get into education. I'm going to try and keep the salesy stuff away from this presentation. I thought the video was nice. So why would you want to improve in-building public safety radio coverage? Well, one, it's mandated. As Richard mentioned, it is law, and it is controlled by your local authority having jurisdiction, which is typically your fire department for your area. The public safety communication system is made up of antennas. So here in Collier County, where I am, and down here in Naples, the entire county has several antenna systems, towers. The Collier County Emergency Management runs those towers, and they control and have the FCC license for the communications that the fire, EMS, and police use for their radio bands. So one, you want to make sure that your building is meeting code. You want to make sure that your public servants, your first responders, can communicate within your building. You also want to reduce your liability risk. I think Richard touched on that as well. Now that's public safety, but what about cellular? 80% of 911 calls are placed from mobile phones. So if you're in your high-rise building and you need to make a 911 call and you don't have good coverage, then that could be life or death for you. Because an improvement in 1 minute in 911 response time can save thousands of people annually. That is a known statistic. So we focus our efforts on making sure that if you have to put in a public safety radio system in your building, that we make it easy for you to also upgrade your cellular coverage. Because if you need a public safety system, you probably need a cellular coverage as well in that building. And since most buildings here in this part of Florida are all made of concrete and steel, communications is severely lacking. This is the code. Richard mentioned the code. But what it boils down to is this: you need to perform a radio frequency test for code compliance. So how do you do that? Well, some AHJs do the test themselves, some fire departments. But as an example, here in Collier County, Naples, Fort Myers, and so forth, they rely on certified independent testers, such as Pure Wireless. So we come in and we do a radio frequency test of your building. If you pass that test, and there are certain thresholds that you have to meet for being able to pass your radio communications within the building and within critical areas of that building. If you pass that test, then that test goes back to the authority having jurisdiction, and you don't have to do it again for another year. So it cycles into your fire test certification. Someone has their mic on. They need to turn it off if at all possible. I think that's you, Elliot.
It should be off.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. All right, now, if you fail the test, and what is required to make you fail a test? Well, you have to pass within 99% of the critical areas being elevators, stairwells, fire rooms, things like that. So there are critical areas that you need to pass 99%, and The rest of the building, depending on the AHJ, is somewhere in the 90 to 95% based on what they require. So if you fail that test, then you need to obtain permits and demonstrate that that building will become compliant. That date to get that permit done and demonstrate that the building will be compliant is January 1st, 2024. So what does that involve? That involves you then hiring a company to give you a design for a distributed antenna system in your building, and that design will then be permitted, and you'll be proving to the AHJ that that system will be in place by January 1st, 2025. So after that, after you get your building updated, the AHJ will certify that the system does indeed work. So you'll do a test with the system working. The company that you hire to provide that system will need to provide 24/7 monitoring of that system, because they need to know that the antennas are working all the time. And there are requirements for annual testing that are less severe than the 5-year testing on the system once you have it in your building. So again, if you fail the test, you have to put in a system. That system has to be tested yearly, and then there's a 5-year test as well. So code compliance, if you are greater than 75 feet, you have the extension dates. If you are under 75 feet, you have no extension date. So that brings up the confusion sometimes with the code. The code requires that all buildings are compliant, but leaves it to the AHJ for enforcement. So if your local AHJ is enforcing the code on all buildings, new and or existing, there is no 75 feet requirement to meet the code. There's only a greater than 75 feet requirement to be able to have the extension to be compliant. So
thanks for thank you for clarifying that, because I didn't have that right. So that's very helpful. So this applies to all buildings. Great.
Yes, it does apply to all buildings, but within reason, you really need to check with your local AHJ, because they have different AHJs enforce the code. Some may not require buildings under 50,000 square feet, 2-story, blah, blah, blah. So that it's really up to them. But from a state code requirement, all buildings must be compliant. And there's an extension for buildings that are 75 feet and above. There's a new law that just got signed and went into place July 1st, which applies to buildings that are 75 feet and or applies to apartment buildings that are built out of wood. So what they did for that, because all the apartment complexes, specifically in the middle of the state, were lobbying that they need to get some kind of relief. So the state gave them the following relief: that if you are under 75 feet, made of wood, and your apartment exits directly out to the outside or to a corridor that goes directly to the outside, then you do not have to worry about this code. If you are over 75 feet and made of wood, too bad, you have to comply. If you are under 75 feet, but you have a big common areas, you still have to comply. So they were very specific on that. There will be some confusion, Richard, probably on what dictates an exit. So they'll have some fun with that, with the legal. But I think I sent you an article on
Yes.
that, discussing that. And so that can be of use to anyone that
I'm not sure I would want to be in a wood building more than 75 feet. I mean, that I thought, wow, do they make such things?
I don't want to be in a wood building in Florida. So, so what does the test look like? this is not me. This is not, I'm not this pretty, even with my back turned. But what it involves is that you take a radio set, a tester, and you'll see that on the back of the person in the pictures, and you see the antenna and so forth. We take your floor plan, and this is common not just for us, but for any certified tester that's going to go out and get your permits and help you meet this code. They're required to take your floor plans, enter them into a system, do what's called a 20 grid. It can be 40 grid, but a grid-based test of your entire building, and specifically, in addition to that, all the critical areas that are the fire and police and so forth need to have access to. That is then, we're taking radio frequencies, specifically to the radio frequencies that serve your area. So there's a lot of coordination that has to go into this with the AHJ, the fire department, and also the FCC license holder that runs the actual radio system themselves. They are not necessarily the same group. So the fire department may or may not be the FCC license holder for the radio system. Usually they are not. It's usually the county. Again, here in Collier County, it's Collier County Emergency Management. So that test is then put together. We do heat maps of the building. We do quality, signal strength, and so forth. All of these are in the code that you have to meet. And then if you pass, then we provide that report to the AHJ, and you're set for the year. If you fail, then we can help you from these, or another company can help you put together a system that will make you compliant. But what does that look like once you do put a system in? Well, it's a bunch of antennas, not too much different than Wi-Fi, but usually smaller. They're distributed throughout your building. You have some antennas on top of your building, which you see in the upper left-hand corner. I don't think you can see can you see my cursor? Okay.
Yes.
All right, wonderful. Well, see, you take these antennas, we coordinate those antennas with the local AHJ and the FCC frequency holder so that we know exactly where we need to point those antennas. We bring in the best signal and we pipe it into the building, and we distribute it out to all these distributed antennas. I'm not going to get into the actual weeds of the technology because there's several different types of technologies, but needless to say, it's a distributed antenna system in your building that brings in the signal and allows that signal to propagate throughout the building and all the areas that you need the service. My advice for anyone that has to do this is to make sure that they only put antennas where it's needed. If you don't know what you need, then you look at then you go by the test. If the test says that the top floor passes and your integrator is saying you need antennas up there, then you need to find another integrator. So you want to make this as cost effective as possible, and you don't want to put in antennas where they're not needed, because more antennas is not necessarily good. It can cause problems. It can cause interference with the FCC license holder. You do not want to cause interference with the FCC license holder, because if your building causes interference with the FCC license holder, you can be fined up to $100,000. You do not want to do that. So make sure that you're hiring reputable people that know what they're doing. We're not the only reputable people in the state. So again, that's my only sales thing. I'm trying to give advice. So the takeaways is that since this is mandated, you need to get your buildings tested. I would suggest you do it as fast as possible. Why? Because it's mandated for the entire state. There's only a handful of companies like ours that can do this. There's manpower issues, and there's if you need a system, then there is supply chain issues. As an example, I'll give you an example. In just Naples, not Collier County, but the Naples and Greater Naples, there's over 230 buildings that are, in our opinion, are not going to meet the code. 230 buildings, a lot of buildings to have to upgrade. So if you wait until middle or end of next year to see if you need a system, and then all of a sudden you need a system and you need to get a permit, that permit has to show that you're going to actually be compliant. So that means you have to commit to buying a system and scheduling it to be put in 2025. The entire state is doing this. So you may find that you get put at the end of the line for getting your building compliant. And we're trying to educate people that, you know, getting on this sooner than later is much better. Now, once you have this and you put this in your building, if you are also upgrading your cellular, then what have you just done? You've made your building safer. You now have up to 5G. They're upgrading 5G as we speak in certain areas, especially down here in Collier County. And so now your building becomes smarter because you can then add the wonderful things that you would like to have in your older building that some of the newer buildings already have. So we believe that though it is a cost to have to do this, we believe in being as efficient as possible and looking to the future of what you can do with this type of system to make your building safer, make your occupants safer, and to stay in compliance for the future and future code changes, which you can find out by following Safer Buildings Coalition. So that's my short and sweet, Richard, presentation. Elliot is on. He can chime in and add more as he sees fit. But
Well,
I appreciate the opportunity to convey the presentation.
thank you, Dane. Dane, can you hear me, Richard?
Yes, welcome, Elliot.
Oh, thank you. I don't have a video. I don't know why, but my apologies, everyone. Oh, here I am. Oh, how good to finally get on, even though a small picture on my phone. Let me emphasize my apologies again about the difficulty getting on. Emphasize the aspect of adhering to this law as quickly as possible. Yesterday, I was on a call talking about the structural reserves that condominiums are going to have to put in throughout the state. And a question was asked, will there be some extensions put in on this? Because there've been extensions on sprinklers, there've been extensions on this code itself, which was supposed to take a place in 2019, 2020. There've been a lot of extensions granted. And the answer was a resounding no. So you've got to go ahead and pay attention to this and get on with it and to do a test and to make sure your building passes for this. And I'm just reiterating what Dane has already said, but if it doesn't pass, you need to get the problem fixed. This saves lives, ladies and gentlemen. This saves firemen's lives. This saves your lives, your residents' lives, the HOA managers that are on here. It is so critical to adhere to this. Richard, hopefully they've gotten the point. We've hit the nail about 10 times, but let me turn it back over to you and we'll chime back in if they've got questions, etc. I neglected to introduce who we were in the beginning because I wasn't on. Dane Bowling comes from a background of telecommunications from AT&T as well as Ericsson. Long in the tooth, as we say, in that industry. Wayne, whose picture you couldn't see in uniform because there was a little foul up in getting it there in time, is a retired 40-year fire chief in emergency management. I come from the cellular and paging and telecommunications background as well. I represented Bell South throughout the Southeast and bought them out of their licenses in paging and represented them in cellular throughout the Southeast in 38 markets. And so we know this industry awfully well. We're a new company headquartered in Southwest Florida, but are going to be doing business all over the state as we've had requests already from the East Coast, et cetera. So we will travel wherever the need may be. So thank you again, Richard. Let me turn it back to you.
Sure. I know, Rain, we might have some questions, but one question I thought of that people might be asking. So I'm in a condominium building or a cooperative building. I have to install this equipment is it a material alteration that would require a unit owner vote? And I would tell you very likely, no, it is a material alteration. You're installing equipment that is not presently in the building, but you would not need an owner vote to do it, because the purpose of installing this equipment is to meet current code and to basically protect the building and its occupants. And so there's an exception in the material alteration laws about when you need an owner vote, and when the material alteration is necessary to meet code or is otherwise being done primarily to protect the building, you generally would not need a unit owner vote. Now, obviously, discuss that with your own legal counsel, but I would suggest you probably don't need an owner vote to approve the installation of this equipment. Rain, do we have any other questions?
Yeah, there's a couple of questions that came in, but I kind of have a similar question. When doing some type of an upgrade, about how long does the installation take? And is it something that you really kind of have to maybe close off certain areas, and maybe residents wouldn't have access to either areas or possibly to their unit while this is being done?
Oh, that's a lot in that question. Let's take the unit question first. Some AHJs require that that the system is only required in the common areas of the building. However, some areas like City of Naples requires that the condos also have to be covered. So it depends on the AHJ, and we can help with that, whether you're using us or not. We're more than happy to contact the AHJ for anyone that needs and help you through that. So number one, where in the building do you need coverage required by the AHJ? You have to determine that. And again, as I mentioned, it may or may not require the individual condo units to be covered. If it does require the individual condo units to be covered, then you need to be able to go into those condo units during your testing and be able to test a couple of points within that condominium unit. Some buildings are much more difficult than others, because some buildings have an elevator just opens up into a condo unit, and you've got a 4,000 square foot condo unit. So you're going to have to go in a few more areas of that condo unit than you would for other buildings, which gets into the question, okay, how long does it take to actually put this thing in? To test, a day or two at most to test, depending on scheduling. So if I'm only doing, or anyone doing this, is only doing the common areas, there's no reason why you can't do a 20-story building within that day. If you're needing to get into the individual condo units, if you have the ability to do that, you could do that in the same day. But give yourself a couple of days minimum to be able to get through testing. When it comes to installation, that is where it's tricky. It depends on the building. I know you hate to hear that. Some buildings have horrendous cabling issues in their buildings. They don't have any conduits. They have no way to get from floor to floor, blah, blah, blah. So some of these buildings you may need to approve drilling through walls and so forth. Your installers need to know what they're doing, obviously, and if you're going in and out of fire rooms, firewalls, and so forth, knowing how to make sure that is resealed properly. So I can't really give you a good clear answer, broad stroke, but it can take weeks, it can take a month to put in a system like this, depending on the building. And it takes much longer to get it configured, to get it spec'd out, to get it ordered and get it in, because this is specialized equipment. It's not stuff you just go to Home Depot and get off the shelf. So this equipment is very specialized. So it takes a while to get the equipment in. So I hope that answers your question, but I'd be more than happy to talk specifics to anyone that needs that.
Well, I think you hit on the message. It's not a cookie cutter type of situation. It's going to depend on where you are and the composition of your association, as well as other factors relating to how long it's going to take and where exactly you have to put in things.
Well, I can add a few comments to that. It's that what areas do you have to put the system in? Any building that has the garage has to be covered as well. So you have to cover the garage, you have to cover all those dark rooms back in the corners of these buildings. I've been through a lot of condominiums, and I can tell you there's plenty of places that have terrible connectivity, but they need the connectivity. If you've got a building that has well planned out conduit and pathways and so forth, it'll be much faster than a building that's built in the 80s that all their conduit is filled up and they have no pathways. So you have to either make pathways or you have to make you have to determine whether you where you want this cabling and how much of it you want to actually see. So we don't like looking at it, so we want to hide it. And so that becomes a little bit more expensive in areas where you do not have pathways.
Perfect. So a couple questions that have come in. The first one says, does this law apply to 2-story buildings?
It depends on your AHJ. If your AHJ determines that only buildings that are over a certain square feet or a certain occupancy level and so forth, they'll put that on there. But from a statewide standpoint, it's every building. And then they leave it up to the AHJ to then further refine it for their specific area. Miami will be different than Orlando, be different than Naples.
Okay. Another question that came in as we were talking about these 75 feet. Question was, what are the from and to points for measuring the 75-foot requirement?
Floor to floor.
Floor to floor.
Yes.
I imagine, Dane, you're probably familiar with the, and Wayne, you know, several years ago, we had the fire sprinkler retrofit requirements. That was the highest occupiable floor from the lowest level that the firemen could get to with a truck or something. If it's over 75, you were considered high rise. Is that basically the same standard here?
Yes.
And it is, and that 75 feet is measured from the typical grade around the building. So if you have 3 floors or 4 floors of parking garage, that all counts. So it may be the 4th floor living area that, you know, starts to apply. So it's measured from grade, and everything in between there is included.
Our next question that has come in. We have a 3-story mixed-use building with condos on the 3rd floor. Offices are on the 2nd floor and restaurant and retail are on the ground floor. Is this a requirement for commercial space as well? Would this be a shared responsibility and expense?
Yeah, it is a commercial responsibility. It's all buildings, new and existing. Your AHJ will determine the size and so forth of the buildings. And if you do the test and you pass, then it doesn't matter. You know, you pass. As far as shared responsibility, it's really the building owner's responsibility, from my understanding. I'm not a lawyer. This guy is, he can help. However, I do believe it's the building owner. Now, it doesn't prevent, from a cellular standpoint, which is not under code, that's different. Different people can put in cellular amplification systems for their own individual businesses to make them safer. But this code is for the building. So if it's a condo, it's all the owners of that building. If it's a commercial building, it's the commercial building owner. How he wants to be, you know, how he charges rents, if he ups his rent or what have you to meet this code, I'm sure he will.
All right, our next question that came in, and I believe this is talking about installation time and about everything related to that. It says, will they take into consideration how long it will take it to get equipment in, meaning supply issues that are happening now? So is that something that you're seeing that impacts about how long it takes before installations can be done? Are you having supply issues that you're aware of?
Oh, there's supply issues all over the industry. There's no doubt about that. What I suggest is that there are, aside from my echoing going through here, there are a lot of, you've got a lot of time, but not too much time to get moving. I believe that if you wait until next year, you may or may not be able to get this system in, because it's, whether you have a supply chain issue or not, which we do, the entire state of Florida is under this code. And just little old Naples has 230 buildings that I've identified, just easy, identifying that there's 230 buildings that are going to need this system. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that concrete and steel, you're not going to penetrate that. So my advice to anyone on this call, or any of your customers and clients and anyone, is to get your test. Get your test as soon as possible. Your cabling needs to be put in. Your cabling can be put in whether you have the equipment or not. So you can start staging your install and meet your deadlines. If you wait till the last minute, then you still have to get your cabling in. You still have to get your equipment in. You then still have to get it certified and tested. This is the whole process takes several months. It's not just something that you turn on in a week. So
I think it should be noted that we're working with several buildings right now and starting to do installations, et cetera. So timing is very critical on this, and everybody on this call, as we mentioned before, there are other companies to use, et cetera, but I encourage you to please get on with it. It's going to be like everybody heading for the exit is going to be a jam to get in there, and you're going to be in violation of the fire code if you don't meet this. So what does that mean? That means you will not pass the code. You'll have to get, you can conceivably be fined. You'll be delayed in doing construction projects on your building, et cetera. So very critical to please get started on this.
All right, I have another question that has come in. It says, our association has phone jacks at each floor adjacent to elevators and plug-in phones at the fire panel. Local AHJ said this was enough. Is that still good enough for them?
if the local AHJ says that something is enough to meet this requirement, then it's totally up to the local AHJ.
Okay. When it comes to installing this equipment, is it at all possible coming in through fiber optics, or is it really up to the association what method they use to get the information?
The installation, different types of systems use different type of cabling. There's typically a lot of what is called coax involved in this. Fiber optic cabling, if you have large buildings or buildings that are in a campus type environment and you want to run a system, a central system, and then branch out, which is a possibility that, let's say there's an association that may have 4 condominium buildings. You don't need 4 systems, you need 1 system. So there's a way to make this more efficient. But the cabling is determined by the type of system and the system vendor, us or someone else.
You can make it very efficient and very economical, depending on the planning and the people that you're utilizing to put this in.
Very good. All right. If anybody else has any more questions, let's go ahead and get them in the chat or the question. I do have one more here that I see. This is, we are in Coral Gables, and back in 2019, we were found in compliance with the AHJ. Do we still need to have this yearly inspections? I asked them, but never got a specific report.
Yes, and here's why. Things change. A building gets built between the antenna, between the public safety tower and your building. Now all of a sudden you're blocked. You have no radio communication in your building. Or maybe they were a little bit more lax before. Now that the laws are more stringent, the inspector might be a little bit better now. Inspectors change. Some inspectors are wink, wink, nod, nod. I hope no inspectors do that might be on this call, but that has happened. It's real world here. So the point of the matter is that yes, you need to have your buildings tested, especially if you have large buildings, and the AHJs are being more and more prudent. They're getting better trained. They're being more diligent, and this is only going to become more required than less required in the future.
Okay.
So the answer to your question is yes, you should, even whether you pass or not, you should test every year.
And Richard, it might be helpful if you spoke a bit more about liability, about since what's happened at Surfside in Miami, everybody is extremely diligent about adhering to codes, et cetera. God forbid there's a problem in a building, et cetera. Richard, can you speak to that a bit more?
Sure. I think Dane said it very well. If you have a system in place and you don't regularly, and this goes for any system, the fire sprinkler system, any kind of safety system, you're setting yourself up for absolute liability. If something happens and they look at your logs and say, well, when was the last time you tested? And you say, what is that? Or well, I don't know. Or you want to regularly inspect all your systems and document it so that you can show if the system was down, you fixed it. Other than that, again, foreseeable harm is what we're looking at here. And a lawyer on the other side that would, if there was, God forbid, a tragedy, would say, well, you knew the building, you couldn't talk to anybody, and you knew that people couldn't communicate. I'm not saying you'd have absolute liability, but you've given them a hook into your insurance and into your liability by saying you knew there was a potential problem, you could have done things and you didn't do it. That's all the personal injury attorney is going to need to light you up with a lawsuit. So it's important that you do consider those risks.
Folks, I tell you what we do when we come in. We improve your cellular system as well. If you're in the parking garage, can't get a signal, and God forbid there's an incident, someone has a heart attack, someone's attacked, any of these things sort of happen, and you try and dial 911 and you can't get out, you've got to run outside to get a signal. Those are precious seconds and minutes conceivably that are lost. So we come in, we're doing the fire code, we do cellular. We also put in FirstNet, which is the AT&T solution, where people can talk, the emergency systems can talk to each other, fire, police, and EMS. We do a one-stop shop on something like that because it's so critical. And so anyone you use, I encourage you to make sure that they're going to take care of all the needs. While cellular is not in the code at the moment, it'll probably get written in when it comes around next time. The cellular service has got to work throughout your building.
So talking about having these different types of services done, some of our attendees are from all over the state. And I think people may have a little bit of trouble trying to figure out what type of company provides this type of service. I mean, people in the Southwest Florida area obviously will contact you, but what are some other companies or types of companies that people maybe on the other coast or up north in the Panhandle that they should be able to contact to find this type of service?
Yeah, well, some of the larger, more capable fire prevention companies do the public safety aspect, but may not do the cellular aspect. So, your sprinkler company, your fire alarm company, and so forth, they may do it or may know someone that does on the public safety side. Then you have the guys who are putting in cellular systems. They may or may not do the public safety. So if you look up companies, you start with your fire from a public safety standpoint. Start with your fire alarm people. If you're wanting, in my opinion, more. I'm trying to walk the line here. Radio communications is different than plumbing, from electricity and so forth. My advice to anyone outside of our area, and our area is Florida, but I'm selling again, sorry. Find a good company that knows radio frequencies, radio communications. So a distributed antenna system company, they're throughout Florida, and make sure that they understand radio communications more than just alarms and so forth. So that's just my advice, because there have been, you do not want to get into a situation where the system that gets put in violates the FCC license holders' frequencies, and then you're either required to pull the thing out, which you just spent a gob amount of money on, or you're fine because you're bringing the system down, and you don't want to be responsible for bringing a system down that they're used for, radio communications for fire, police, and EMS. So that's just my advice, is to really look into companies that have good radio frequency experience in distributed antenna systems.
Perfect. I have another question here. It says, does the building have to have a fire panel to support this type of system?
No, it does not. If it has a fire panel, then there are requirements to connect to the fire panel. If you do not have a fire panel, obviously you can't connect to it, so they don't require it.
Perfect. Well, I think that's all the questions that we have come in. Richard, do you have any final questions?
I don't, but guys, do you have an email address or a website that people can go to and request your video that you showed or other information about your firm? And certainly if they contact us, we'll forward your information to them. But do you have a way they can contact you?
1 second, I will put it on the screen.
While Dane is doing that, the name of the company again is purewireless.io, a new acronym .io. And
How's
there
that?
you have my number and Dane's number to reach us. Wayne's number was on the presentation, which I believe is being recorded, but I'll repeat my number for you, 239-248-8424. And Dane is 540-287-0649. And we're happy to answer any questions, any assistance we can possibly do throughout the state.
Okay, and anybody that contacts the maid, myself, or Rain, we will forward Elliot and Dane's information to you, and you can contact them directly. I want to thank you guys. I mean, I learned something every day. I think this is very helpful. Again, I started off by saying I wasn't even aware of this law until you brought it to my attention. So I appreciate that. And I think we had an audience of 75, close to 80 people all over the state. So I think this will be very helpful. I encourage you all to look into it and watch out next time for next month's MAID seminar.
All right.
It's a
Thank you
pleasure.
all.
Thank
Thanks a
you
lot.
for your attention, everyone.
Thank you.